I was working at the diner that day, just trying to get through another shift. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The place was quiet, with just a few customers scattered around. Then, in walked an older lady. She looked to be in her late 70s, maybe even 80, with gray hair pulled back in a simple bun. She was dressed in an old sweater and some worn-out shoes. She walked slowly, her hands trembling as she adjusted the small purse hanging off her shoulder. I watched her as she made her way to a booth near the window. She seemed sweet enough, but I couldn't help but feel a little annoyed. She didn't exactly fit in with the usual crowd. It wasn't like I was judging her, but people like her often made the place seem even more depressing. I sighed quietly and walked over to her table, my smile polite but forced. "Hi there, what can I get you today?" I asked, trying to sound cheerful. The woman looked up at me, her eyes warm but tired. "Just a cup of coffee, please," she said in a soft, raspy voice. I nodded and turned to leave, but then she added, "And maybe a piece of toast. Nothing fancy, just simple." I could feel my patience thinning. Honestly, I had bigger tables to wait on, ones that would tip better. But I smiled and nodded anyway. "All right, I'll be right back with that." As I turned, I heard her fumbling with something in her purse. She pulled out a crumpled $20 bill and slowly began counting out the change. I rolled my eyes and muttered under my breath, "You really think you're gonna leave a good tip with that?" I didn't mean for her to hear me, but the words slipped out and I knew it was rude. Still, I didn't care. I had my own problems, my own struggles, and I was tired of being stuck in a place like this. The next day I was back at the diner. It was busier than usual, the clattering of plates and chatter filling the air. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake the memory of the old woman from yesterday. The way she'd struggled to count her change, the way I'd brushed her off. I felt guilty, but I tried to push the feeling away. After all, it wasn't like I'd done anything that bad. She'd just been, well, different. And I had my own problems to deal with. Then I saw her again. She walked in through the door, exactly the same as before, slow, a little hunched over, but still holding that same small purse. She was dressed in the same worn-out sweater, but there was something different this time. She wasn't alone. Behind her, a well-dressed man in a sharp suit followed, his posture straight, his face serious. He looked like someone who belonged in an office building, not a diner like this. He smiled at the woman, and I saw the way she looked at him, her eyes filled with trust. They sat at the same booth by the window. I took a deep breath and walked over, trying to push away the uneasy feeling creeping up in my chest. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound friendly, though I couldn't help but feel a little nervous. The man looked up at me, his eyes cold but polite. "We'll take the usual, thank you," he said, his voice smooth and calm. I nodded, walking away to get their order, but something tugged at the back of my mind. I couldn't quite place it. As I made my way to the counter, I heard snippets of their conversation. The woman's voice was shaky, but the man's was firm, comforting even. She talked about her plans for the future, how excited she was about what was coming. And the man seemed to be listening, nodding, offering advice. Then, the strangest thing happened. The woman smiled, a soft, knowing smile, and whispered something to the man. "I'll take care of it, dear," she said. I froze in my tracks. My stomach dropped. I hurried back to the kitchen, my heart racing. There was something about that woman, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. I knew I had no right to judge her, but I couldn't stop thinking about the way she'd spoken to that man. It was like she wasn't just some old lady who didn't know how to tip. She seemed important somehow. But I didn't have time to dwell on it. I had orders to fill. A few minutes later, I brought their food to the table. The woman smiled at me when I placed the coffee in front of her, but there was something more in her eyes this time. A calm, almost knowing expression. I forced a smile and started to walk away, but then she spoke. "Excuse me," she said, her voice soft but clear. I turned around a little surprised. "Yes?" The man beside her watched me, his gaze steady. "Could you bring the check when you have a moment?" he asked, his tone respectful. "Of course," I said, nodding quickly. As I walked back to the counter, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Something about them just didn't add up. But before I could figure it out, a customer called for me, and I had to focus on my work. It wasn't until later that day, just before my shift ended, that I overheard something that made my blood run cold. The man was on the phone with someone. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, but his words were loud enough for me to hear. "Yes, it's all set. The transaction is complete. I'll make sure she knows everything in the morning. She won't be disappointed." There was a pause, and then the man added, "You can stop doubting her. She's been through enough." I didn't know what to think. Who was he talking about? Who was this woman, really? Was she someone special, someone I'd been completely wrong about? The next morning, I was back at the diner again, but I couldn't stop thinking about everything that had happened yesterday. My mind kept racing with questions. Who was the woman? What was her connection to the man in the suit? Why did it feel like I'd missed something important? As I was wiping down the counter, I saw them again. The old woman and the man in the suit. But this time, there was something else in the air, an undeniable sense of importance that I couldn't ignore. They weren't just ordinary customers. I could feel it in the way they carried themselves, in the quiet way they sat at the booth, like they were waiting for something. I walked over to them, trying to act normal, but my nerves were getting the best of me. "Good morning," I said, my voice sounding a little shakier than I meant it to. "How's everything today?" The man smiled at me, but this time, there was something more in his expression, something that felt secret. "Everything's perfect, thank you," he said, looking up from his phone. The woman, as always, was gentle, but there was a new strength in her eyes. "We're just waiting for someone," she said softly, "but I'm sure they'll be here soon." I didn't know why, but I felt the need to ask, "Who's coming?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. The woman smiled at me, a smile that felt both warm and knowing. "You'll see," she said quietly. "But don't worry, it's not what you think." That only made my curiosity grow. But before I could ask anything more, the door to the diner opened. I glanced over, and my breath caught in my throat. A man in a sharp suit stepped inside, looking like he belonged in a boardroom rather than a small-town diner. He walked straight to their booth, and the moment he sat down, the woman's face lit up. She reached out to take his hand, and he held it gently, as if he'd been waiting for this moment too. I stood frozen in place, unable to move. Something was happening here, something big, but I had no idea what it was. The man turned to me and smiled, but his eyes were different now, more focused, more intense. "I assume you've been wondering who she is," he said, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. I blinked, caught off guard. I'm sorry, I don't understand." The woman looked at me, her eyes soft but filled with something deeper. "It's time to tell you," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "I think you deserve to know the truth." And that was when she told me everything. I stood there, speechless, my heart pounding in my chest. The woman I had so carelessly dismissed just days before wasn't just some old lady struggling to get by. She wasn't the kind of person I thought she was at all. "You see," she began, her voice calm but filled with something that felt like a quiet power. "I used to own several businesses back in the city. A lot of people know me there. I sold everything, retired, and moved here for a simpler life. But I never stopped caring about what happens to the people around me." The man in the suit nodded, adding, "She's more than just a retired businesswoman. She's one of the largest private investors in the country. People in the corporate world respect her. A lot of them still ask for her advice." I felt like the ground had shifted beneath me. The woman who I'd looked down on, who I had mocked in my head, was someone incredibly important. I suddenly felt small, like a fool. I didn't know what to say, so I just stood there, trying to process everything. The woman looked at me, her expression soft but knowing. "I'm not upset with you, dear. I know how the world works. I've been in your shoes, struggling, trying to make ends meet, but sometimes we miss the bigger picture. Sometimes we don't see the people who have everything to teach us, not by the way they look, but by what they carry inside." I felt my eyes sting with tears, the weight of my own judgment crashing down on me. I had been so wrong, so quick to judge, to assume, but I didn't have the words to apologize. I just stood there, feeling the deep shame wash over me. "Don't be hard on yourself," the man said, sensing my discomfort. "Everyone makes mistakes, but it's how you learn from them that matters, Shelly. And I hope this will be a lesson, not just for you, but for everyone who crosses my path. People aren't always what they seem. Sometimes, kindness and respect are the only things that truly matter. I nodded, feeling a lump form in my throat. I had learned more in these few minutes than I had in the past few years. It wasn't just about money or status. It was about seeing people for who they truly were, not what they appeared to be on the outside. The woman stood up slowly, taking the man's hand. "We're going to go now, dear," she said, her voice still warm, but with an underlying strength that made me feel like I was in the presence of something much bigger than myself. "Take care of yourself, and remember, the world is full of surprises." As they walked out, I stood there, frozen in place, my feet glued to the floor. The door to the diner swung shut behind them with a soft chime, but the sound didn't break me from the daze I was in. I couldn't move, couldn't think straight. My mind was racing, trying to process everything I'd just learned. I kept replaying her words in my head, the way she'd spoken so gently but with a quiet strength. "The world is full of surprises." Those words were echoing, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were meant for me, for the person I was right now. Someone who had made assumptions, who had been too quick to judge. It was like everything around me had gone blurry, and the only thing in focus was the sting of shame. How could I have been so blind? I had dismissed her, ignored the signs that there was more to her than what I had seen on the surface. I had mocked her silently, without even giving her a chance. And now I knew the truth. My heart felt heavy, like it had been filled with stones. I felt guilty for what I had thought of her, guilty for every unkind word I'd muttered under my breath. But it wasn't just guilt that weighed me down, it was regret. Regret for not seeing beyond the surface, for not recognizing that everyone has a story, something more beneath their exterior. I could feel tears start to prick at the corners of my eyes. I didn't let them fall, not yet. But the ache in my chest was real. I had just witnessed something that would change me forever. It wasn't just about her or the truth that had been revealed. It was about me. It was about realizing that I had the power to change, to be better, to be kinder, to see people for who they truly were, not just by what they wore or how they looked. The diner around me felt so small, so insignificant, compared to the shift inside me. I hadn't expected any of this. I hadn't expected to learn such a big lesson from someone I thought was just another customer. And yet, there I was, standing still, on the brink of something different. I could feel the weight of the moment sinking in, but with it came a strange sense of clarity. Maybe I didn't have all the answers yet, but at least now I knew where to start. I could be better. I would be better. And I promised myself, in that quiet moment, that I'd never forget the lesson that woman had unknowingly taught me. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story and found it meaningful. If you did, please like, comment, and share to help spread the word. It really means a lot. And if you're not subscribed yet, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any new content. Your support makes all the difference and helps me create more stories for you. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below. See you in the next one.